The Varian Empire had known peace for over 10,000 years, a beacon of wisdom and stability in the vast darkness of space. Its people were scholars, diplomats, and explorers, revered across the stars for their unmatched knowledge. But all of that changed in a single night. Princess Axelera, the only heir to the Varian throne, was taken. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving no chance for resistance. The enemy was the Rulzan Dominion, a war-driven empire that thrived on conquest and destruction. Their leader, Warlord Korak, had long waited for a chance to crush the Varians, and now, with their princess in his grasp, he had the perfect weapon to break their will. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings, discussing strategies, alliances, and negotiations, but everyone knew the truth diplomacy had failed before it could even begin. The Varians, despite their technological brilliance, had never been warriors. They had no armies, no warships, no soldiers trained for battle. And now the survival of their empire depended on a single decision: should they turn to Earth for help? Humanity was still new to the galactic scene. Their homeworld had been discovered barely a century ago, yet in that short time, they had already built a reputation that both intrigued and terrified the older civilizations. Unlike the Varians, humans were warriors by nature, having survived centuries of war, conflict, and struggle. While the rest of the galaxy had moved beyond the need for warfare, humans had perfected it. The stories of Earth soldiers spread like wildfire, unpredictable, relentless, and unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But asking for help from Earth came with its own risks. The Varians feared what would happen if they allowed humans to intervene. Would they demand power in return? Would they change the balance of the galaxy forever? And most importantly, could one human truly stand against an empire as mighty as the Rulzan Dominion? Desperation left them no choice. A message was sent to Earth, carrying the details of the crisis, and in less than a day, a response came. There was no discussion, no hesitation. Humanity would send help. But when the Varians saw what Earth had chosen to send, they were shocked. There was no fleet, no army, no invasion force. Instead, Earth sent a single-man commander, Adrian Voss. The Varian Council could not believe it. Was this some kind of joke? An insult? They had expected an elite squadron, or at least a powerful warship, but instead they received one human standing alone before them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. His dark combat armor gleamed under the Council's chamber lights, marked with insignias unfamiliar to the Varians. A scar ran down his cheek, a silent reminder of the battles he had already survived. But none of this reassured the Council. One man cannot defeat an empire, one of the Varian elders argued. You are sending him to his death. Voss, however, remained unfazed. He had seen the skepticism in their eyes the moment he arrived. He had heard the whispers, the disbelief, the doubt. None of it mattered. He wasn't here to prove himself to politicians. He was here to complete a mission. With a voice as calm as the void, he replied, I don't need an army. I just need a way in. Those words sent a shiver through the room. Something about the way he said them carried an unshakable certainty, as if he already knew how this would end. The Council had no choice but to trust him. With little time to argue, they handed him everything they knew about the Rulzan fortress, its security systems, and the last known location of Princess Aglara. It was a heavily guarded stronghold, floating in orbit above a dying sun, surrounded by warships, protected by an entire fleet. An impossible mission. But Adrian Voss wasn't like the rest of the galaxy. Impossible was just another word for challenge. Within hours, he was aboard a sleek, unmarked stealth ship, provided by the Varians, setting course for the enemy stronghold. The journey was silent, but his mind was already working. He studied every detail of the mission, memorizing security codes, enemy patrol routes, and the structure of the fortress itself. He wasn't just walking into enemy territory, he was walking into the heart of the Dominion, a place where no one had ever escaped alive. Yet, if everything went according to plan, the Rulzans would never see him coming. As his ship neared its destination, the vastness of the Rulzan fleet came into view. Warships stretched across the horizon, their massive hulls glowing with the eerie red lights of their weapon systems. It was a sight meant to intimidate, a display of power so overwhelming that no rational being would dare challenge it. But Voss wasn't here to be rational. He was here to win. His fingers tightened around the controls, and a smirk crossed his lips. Voss was going to make them pay. The stealth ship glided through the cold darkness of space, a mere shadow against the vastness of the Rulzon Dominion's war-torn sector. Commander Adrian Voss sat in silence, his sharp eyes scanning the holographic display before him, mapping every detail of the enemy stronghold. The Rulzon war fortress was a monstrous structure, its black metal surface reflecting the dying light of the sun it orbited. It wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress built to break the spirit of entire civilizations. Inside, Princess Exelara was being held as a pawn in a much larger game, one designed to shatter the Varian Empire's will to resist. The galaxy had already accepted her fate. No one had ever infiltrated a Rulzon stronghold and lived to tell the tale. No one had ever escaped its unbreakable security grid, let alone challenge the warlords who ruled from within. But Voss wasn't here to argue odds or calculate risks. He was here to do what humanity did best: win against the impossible. As he neared the fortress, the ship's artificial intelligence whispered warnings into his earpiece. Multiple enemy patrols roamed the area, their scanners sweeping for any sign of intrusion. The Rulzans were no fools. They expected rescue attempts, and they had prepared for them. Automated turrets lined the outer hull, their weapons primed to incinerate any unauthorized vessel. Massive battleships drifted nearby, their cannons humming with energy, ready to obliterate anything that dared to approach. Voss remained calm. He had studied their patterns, their weaknesses, the blind spots they didn't think anyone could exploit. With a few precise adjustments, he activated the ship's cloaking system and began his descent, slipping past the enemy's watchful eyes like a ghost in the wind. The docking bay loomed ahead, heavily guarded by elite Rulzon soldiers clad in crimson armor. They were larger than humans, their reptilian features hidden beneath thick helmets, their bodies built for war. Their weapons were unlike anything found on Earth: plasma rifles capable of melting through steel in seconds. Voss studied them for a brief moment before making his decision. He couldn't afford a firefight, not yet. His approach had to be silent, precise, and brutal. Slipping into his advanced combat suit, he engaged the adaptive camouflage system, blending into the shadows as he moved. Every step was calculated, every motion controlled. He moved like a predator, unseen and unheard, his footsteps lighter than the whisper of the wind. One guard turned, sensing something, but it was already too late. Voss struck like lightning, his knife slicing through the alien's throat before a sound could escape. The body crumpled without a struggle. Another guard fell in seconds, a suppressed shot ending his life before he could react. Voss moved quickly, dragging the bodies out of sight and taking the access card from one of them. With a quick scan, the security door slid open, granting him entry into the fortress. The air inside was thick with the scent of metal and energy, the dim corridors illuminated by the pulsing glow of alien technology. Every hallway was lined with security cameras, automated turrets, and biometric scanners designed to detect intruders. Voss smirked. The Rulzans had prepared for an army, but they weren't ready for him. He moved deeper into the structure, using ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels to avoid detection. His enhanced visor displayed real-time enemy movements, marking every patrol, every locked door, every obstacle in his path. The mission was a delicate balance of patience and precision. One wrong move, and the entire fortress would come down on him. As he approached the high-security cells, his heart remained steady, his mind focused. The princess was close, but so were her captors. Two heavily armed Rulzon guards stood at the entrance to the cell block, their weapons at the ready. Voss didn't hesitate. A single, perfectly aimed shot dropped one instantly, while the second barely had time to react before a blade pierced his chest. The reinforced doors to the prison chamber required a high-clearance passcode, but Voss had come prepared. Retrieving a small hacking device from his gear, he connected it to the security console, bypassing the encryption in a matter of seconds. The door hissed open, revealing the dimly lit cell within. Princess Exelara sat in the corner, her silver eyes watching him with a mix of surprise and suspicion. She was not what he expected. Unlike the delicate and fragile royal he had imagined, she carried herself with the poise of someone who refused to break, despite the odds. Her white battle robes were torn, her face marked with exhaustion, closing in from all directions. There was no time for stealth anymore. The battle was about to begin. The moment the alarms echoed through the fortress, Adrian Voss knew the game had changed. Stealth was no longer an option. The Rulzon soldiers moved fast, their heavy boots pounding against the metal floors as they converged on his position. Their guttural voices barked orders, and the sharp whine of energy weapons charging filled the air. Voss didn't wait. He grabbed Princess Exelera's wrist and pulled her behind cover as the first barrage of plasma bolts seared through the corridor, scorching the walls where they had stood just seconds ago. With calculated precision, he drew his pulse rifle and returned fire. 3 shots, 3 kills. The reptilian warriors collapsed, their armor smoking from the impact. But for every enemy that fell, more arrived. He needed a way out fast. His visor mapped the fortress in real time, highlighting structural weak points and hidden passages. One route stood out, a narrow maintenance tunnel leading to an auxiliary hangar. It was risky, but it was their best shot. "We move now," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Solara nodded, her eyes sharp with understanding. She wasn't a helpless royal, she was a survivor. That would make things easier. They sprinted through the dimly lit corridors, the fortress trembling as security drones deployed from the walls. Small but deadly, the drones hovered above, scanning for targets before unleashing rapid bursts of plasma fire. Voss ducked behind a column, calculating his shots. With swift precision, he fired at the ceiling, striking a power conduit. Sparks exploded as the energy grid shorted out, causing the drones to drop lifelessly to the floor. They kept moving, weaving through the labyrinth of metallic halls, every step taking them deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The fortress was massive, built like a war machine, with layers of defenses meant to withstand full-scale invasions. But Voss wasn't an army, he was a single warrior with a singular purpose, and that made him far more dangerous. The Rulzans didn't know how to fight someone like him. He was unpredictable, using their own fortress against them, turning their strength into weakness. But time was running out. The Dominion's forces weren't just reacting anymore, they were coordinating. Barricades formed at every major junction, forcing Voss to take detours through hazardous zones filled with reactor vents, unstable platforms, and sealed pressure chambers. As they reached an upper deck, a deep, rumbling growl stopped them in their tracks. The air turned heavy with tension as a towering Rulzan warrior stepped forward, his armor thicker, his presence more menacing than the others. A war beast. These were the Dominion's elite enforcers, creatures bred for destruction. The beast's crimson eyes locked onto Voss, and in an instant it lunged with terrifying speed. Voss barely rolled aside as the massive claws tore through the wall where he had been standing. He fired a burst of plasma rounds, but the creature's thick armor absorbed the impact. This wasn't a fight he could win with brute force. He needed a different approach. He noticed the structural supports above them, heavy beams holding an unstable overhead platform. A plan formed instantly. "Keep moving," he shouted to Exelara, who hesitated only for a moment before sprinting towards the exit. Voss dodged another swipe from the warbeast and then fired at the supports. The ceiling groaned, metal screeching as the entire structure collapsed. The beast let out a furious roar before being buried beneath tons of debris. Dust filled the air, and for a brief moment there was silence. Then, movement. The rubble shifted, and a claw emerged. It wasn't dead. Not yet. But Voss didn't stay to finish the job. He turned and ran, catching up with Exelara just as they reached the final corridor before the hangar. The exit was in sight, but so was their final obstacle. A security checkpoint, reinforced with automated turrets and at least a dozen heavily armed Rulzan soldiers. This was it, the last stand before freedom. Solara turned to Voss, her expression unreadable. "Can we make it?" she asked. He reloaded his weapon, glancing at the enemy ahead. The odds were terrible, but that had never stopped him before. A smirk played on his lips as he gripped his rifle tighter. "We don't have to make it," he said. "We just have to make them wish we didn't." And then he charged. The moment Adrian Voss charged, the world around him exploded into chaos. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, searing past him as the Rulzen soldiers opened fire. The automated turrets locked onto his movement, their targeting systems adjusting with deadly precision. But Voss wasn't running blindly every step, every motion was calculated. He dove forward, rolling behind a crate just as the first barrage struck, turning the floor behind him into molten slag. The enemy thought they had him cornered, but they had underestimated him. That was their first mistake. With lightning-fast reflexes, he tossed a small device over the barricade, a micro-EMP grenade. A sharp pulse of energy erupted, frying the turret's sensors and causing the nearest Rulzen warriors to stumble as their visors flickered. That was all the opening he needed. Voss leapt over the cover, his rifle spitting fire as he took down 2 enemies before they could recover. A third lunged at him, a massive warhammer swinging towards his head, but he sidestepped at the last moment and drove his combat knife into the alien's exposed neck. The creature gurgled, collapsing as Voss wrenched the blade free. He didn't stop. He couldn't. More enemies were closing in, their weapons lighting up the battlefield. A bolt of plasma singed his shoulder, but he ignored the pain, focusing only on the fight. He moved like a shadow, weaving between gunfire, striking with ruthless efficiency. The Rulzens fought hard, but he fought harder. Each kill was swift, precise one shot, one strike, no wasted movements. This wasn't just battle, this was survival. Behind him, Princess Solara wasn't standing idle. She had grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon, using it with surprising skill. Though not as fast or lethal as Voss, she held her own, covering his back as they pushed forward. Their movements were synchronized, 2 warriors fighting as one. But the Rulzens were relentless, and their numbers seemed endless. Reinforcements poured in from every direction, their roars echoing through the hangar. A heavy blast door slammed shut ahead. Voss cursed under his breath. The enemy was adapting. They weren't just trying to kill him anymore, they were trying to trap him. That was their second mistake. He scanned the area, searching for an alternative. His visor highlighted a control panel on the far side of the room. If he could reach it, he could override the lockdown. But between him and the controls stood the final obstacle, a Rulzen commander, twice the size of an ordinary soldier, clad in thick battle armor. This one wasn't just another grunt. The creature's deep, rumbling voice carried across the hangar. "Human," it sneered, gripping a massive energy blade. "You fight well, but this is where it ends." Voss smirked, adjusting his grip on his rifle. "That's what they all say." The commander moved first, faster than expected, bringing its blade down in a deadly arc. Voss barely dodged in time, rolling away as the ground beneath him cracked from the impact. He fired, but the enemy's armor absorbed the shots with ease. This wasn't a fight he could win with brute force. He needed to be smarter. He ducked and weaved, baiting the commander into attacking wildly, making it overcommit to its strikes. Every miss left a small opening, tiny weaknesses in its stance, its reactions. And then he saw it. A small gap in the armor near the left shoulder joint. That was all he needed. As the commander swung again, Voss didn't dodge. Instead, he lunged forward, sliding under the blade and driving his knife into the exposed joint. The alien howled in rage as Voss twisted the blade deeper, severing vital connections. In one swift motion, he pulled out his sidearm and fired point-blank into the weakened armor. The Rulzen staggered, roaring in defiance, but its body was already failing. It collapsed to its knees, struggling to rise, but Voss didn't give it the chance. A final shot to the head ended it. With the commander down, the remaining soldiers hesitated just long enough. Solara had already reached the control panel, her fingers moving swiftly across the alien interface. The heavy blast doors groaned, then slid open, revealing the docking bay beyond. Their escape was within reach. "Move!" Voss shouted, and they sprinted toward the exit. The remaining Rulzans tried to stop them, but their morale had broken. Their leader was dead, and the warrior who had slain him was still standing. Voss fired one last explosive round into the fuel reserves behind them. The resulting blast rocked the fortress, engulfing the hangar in flames as they dove through the exit. The moment they were through, Solara slammed the override, sealing the door behind them. The battle was over. The path to freedom was open. But Voss knew one thing for certain: this war was far from finished. The Galactic Council chamber stood silent, an unnatural stillness settling over the assembly of alien leaders. Hundreds of representatives from countless species filled the massive hall, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely hidden fear. At the center of it all, standing alone on the elevated platform, was a single human. Captain Adrian Voss. His uniform was battle-worn, his face marked with scars that spoke of battles fought in the darkest corners of space. But it was not his wounds that made the council uneasy. It was the message he had come to deliver. The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation, until Voss finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something raw, something unbreakable. "For years, humanity has watched," he began, his gaze sweeping across the gathered leaders. "We have listened to your debates, your treaties, your laws. We have heard the whispers of empires that believe they are untouchable. We have seen tyrants rise and fall. And yet, you all made one mistake." He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the polished floor. "You thought we were weak." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others narrowed their eyes in silent defiance. The Supreme Chancellor of the Dominion, a towering reptilian figure with cold, golden eyes, let out a slow hiss. "You speak with dangerous arrogance, human," he sneered. "Your species is young. You do not understand the weight of galactic politics." Voss smirked, unfazed. "Oh, we understand just fine," he said. "We understand that the strong prey on the weak. We understand that peace is only an illusion when those in power believe no one can challenge them. We understand that, in the end, strength is the only thing that speaks." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And now, it's our turn to speak." With a simple motion, he activated the holo display behind him. The chamber filled with gasps as footage appeared, images of human warships emerging from the void, their sleek forms cutting through the darkness like blades. The screen flickered, showing battlefields where human soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, stood their ground against enemies who had once ruled the stars. And then, the final image, the shattered remains of a Dominion war fleet, wreckage drifting silently in space, proof of humanity's power. The silence was deafening. The Supreme Chancellor's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "You dare threaten us?" he growled. Voss met his gaze without fear. "No," he said. "This is not a threat. This is a promise." He turned to address the entire council. "For too long, humanity has been treated as insignificant. We extended our hand in peace, and you ignored us. We built our worlds in silence, and you dismissed us. But now, after your wars, after your conquests, you have finally learned the truth." His voice hardened. "We are not prey. We are not weak. We are not to be underestimated." He stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle. "Humanity does not seek war," he continued, "but we will not run from it. We do not seek conquest, but we will not be conquered. And we do not seek vengeance." His gaze locked onto the Supreme Chancellor, the slightest smirk playing at his lips. "But we do not forget." The chamber was utterly still. The aliens who had once looked at humans with indifference now saw something else, something terrifying. A species that had survived, adapted, and risen despite the odds. A species that had learned to fight in the shadows, to strike where it hurt the most. A species that, when pushed, did not break. Voss turned to leave, his message delivered. But just before he stepped off the platform, he spoke one last time. His voice was quiet, but in the silence, it rang louder than any war horn. "Humanity has arrived." And with that, the message was sent. The galaxy would never be the same again.